buy innovation. Japan is not capable of developing innovations. It's in a position where it should take innovations from others and then develop and cultivate them. Now, as we have talked to a number of Japanese executives during our travels, we're hearing a lot of pretty interesting, innovative ideas around how to glue new technologies with, let's say, manufacturing product capabilities. We see innovation. I'm going to open it to the panel. How would you react to Scott McNeal's comment? And we've heard both sides of this. How would you react to Scott McNeal's comments that Japan cannot innovate, that they should buy their innovation from the outside? Anyone can.
I thought, Andrew, when you asked this question, the whole room is going to just uproar saying, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. I disagree with it. And the reason I say that, and again, I'm not on the tech side, so I'm not going to give you kind of the tech answer as to why I feel that way. But for me, as part of my evolution and process and learning was a conversation that I had for me was one of these light bulb moments. And I was at a function and, one of the top floors of a magnificent building in the center of Tokyo, drinking fine wine and champagne and bitching to one of the economic liaisons at the U.S. Embassy about how difficult my job was and how hard it was to get them to do things my way. And I was going on and on and on about how hard it was. And he just stopped me and he just said, just be quiet for a minute. Come over to the window with me and just look. And he goes, you need to understand, in a relatively short time ago, none of this existed. This country was decimated at the end of the war. Tokyo was unbelievable. And you said, in a very short amount of time, this is what exists today. So stop complaining that they don't want to do it your way. Understand how they did this. And it was like a punch in the face to me as to that my way is not necessarily the way. So as I kind of understand what McNeal was saying, I would disagree with it.
Fair enough.
One of the things that I would say is that innovation just doesn't mean new groundbreaking product or new fantastic idea that nobody has ever thought before. Innovation also could mean that whatever exists, you improve it in such a way that it becomes more adoptable, more acceptable to larger customer base. I always say this is that in the US, a lot of times, and you showed a lot of the companies' examples, where they were the initiators, but then they fell by the wayside. Here we say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Japanese took it and said, if it ain't broke, improve it. The only thing that they didn't count on was that the Taiwanese and the Koreans came and said, if it ain't broke, make it cheaper. So if you look at, just as an example, Sony TV versus Samsung TV, quality-wise, they are probably equal, I would say. But Samsung TV is much cheaper than Sony. So obviously, as the TV market went global, naturally the public kind of went toward a cheaper product, which gives you somewhat comparable quality as well. So I think Japan has always done this. You take cars or consumer electronics. They took it from the US and improved it to such an extent that they were dominating in consumer electronics. They are still dominating in auto industry. So the same thing could happen. I don't think there should be one thing that, okay, well, we are not going to innovate at all. We are just going to get that from somewhere else, and let's just improve it, or let's just find different ways of coming out with a different product or improved product based on that basic idea. I don't think there should be a decision like one way or the other. Whichever way the innovation comes. I think what he meant, I believe, what he meant was that don't have that mental block, don't have that NIH factor, not invented here, block in your mind. It doesn't matter because you didn't think about it, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. If it's a good idea, adopt it, improve it, just like what you did back in the 80s. Redo that. So I would modify his comment or interpretation of that comment would be that do what you did best back in the 80s again. I think somewhere along the way in the 90s and the early 2000s, Japan kind of fell behind in adopting that and reinventing itself. So that's what needs to come back again.
H, you agree? Disagree?
Yeah, I will agree. Like Nike said that I think that if there is an opportunity, Japan should buy new technology. However, the company needs to have high confidence level to adapt that technology and to create the synergy. If not, maybe it's a waste of money, so you shouldn't do that. So, but basically, I think Japanese company should buy the technology here.
Okay. Just as a last question, so we do have a little bit of time for Q&A. If there's one key lesson that you would want to share with the audience in terms of your observations, your learnings, what it takes to achieve new product innovation success, to achieve the ability to launch and scale high-growth innovations for Japanese companies, what would that one lesson, key takeaway be?
I mean, I think in the space where I was, on medical device and pharmaceutical side, I think probably more than anything was listen to the customer. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily Japanese specific. I think too many companies spend too much time talking to themselves and listening to themselves and convincing each other that what they just said is correct. I think I've always been a very, very customer-oriented manager and leader. And I would listen to my employees, and then I would go verify kind of what real customers think. So I think that's my advice for any company in any country.
Can I say two lessons?
Sorry.
Yeah. One is that for Japanese company, I would say that needs to be relatively low ego company. Typically, Japanese company, when Japanese companies launch new product and they try to dominate the market monopoly, they typically refuse to the industrial standardization for automotive, for batteries, for videotape or whatever. Each company will insist their own standard. On the contrary, in US and Western, all the companies kind of create a forum and come up with the industrial standard very quickly. And because of that, Japanese company kind of were delayed in marketing globally and broad. So if you are sticking to your selfishness, perhaps the chances are less that you can get the global market in first. So that's one thing. And the second thing is kind of a Japanese market specific. I enjoyed Mark and Andrew's presentation today talking about the market segment. You have the lessons are to target the market segment to one, when you start business. But I saw something missing in the 9 segment kind of consideration. I told you that I attempted to launch 30 new products and failed. It failed in 80% rate. But when it comes to the area where the cost of the quality to the customers are high, the failure rate was 0%. I succeeded 100% for those new product launch. So what's the cost of the quality for the customer in Japan, I would say? The cost of the quality, let's think about lithium battery and LCD display panel. If there's a defect in a lithium battery, that's going to cost automotive or airlines or whatever, huge, right? Cost of the customer, cost of the battery quality to the customer is huge on lithium-ion battery. For LCD display, well, of course, quality is important. However, if you see a more functioning pixel in LCD display, would you complain seriously? Would you, do you think that company is gonna recall those products? Maybe not. So in that sense, LCD panels, I would say relatively, the cost of the quality is relatively low for LCD panels. And I tried to launch new products, several new products for LCD industry and failed all of them, unfortunately. But what I wanted to say is that Japan still is maintaining high quality standard. And sometimes that is critical for your customers. Everybody says that quality, 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 but you have to think of the cost of the quality for the customers. So when to launch a new business, globally from Japanese corporation, if the market requires, if the market characteristic is high cost of quality, I would say your success rate should be very high. On the flip side, if the cost of the quality is low for your target segment, I would encourage you to be very well prepared or think about pulling away from or retreating away from that target. And that's through my experience and through data.
Okay. One of the lessons that I have learned, initially in a hard way, but later on I kind of caught on to it. In Japan, there is a concept of honne and tatemae. What that basically talks about is the customer has to feel trust in you. He has to build trust in you. So if you're sincere, instead of the typical mentality, I don't want to stereotype anybody, but typical mentality of a salesperson is, yeah, our product does that, don't worry about it. And whereas sincerely speaking, he or she knows that the product doesn't do it. So if blindly that purchasing manager trusts you or the managing director trusts you and buys the product and it doesn't do what you said it would do, then you have broken the trust. And that goes a long way in Japan. Sometimes I found that it was better to say that, no, it doesn't do this. I know that is your requirement, but our product today doesn't do this. And then give them a plan as to how you're going to come up to that requirement. That builds the trust, and actually many companies have bought from me in spite of the fact that it did not do all the things that they wanted it in the product. So you have to take care of that honne and tatemae and build that trust and make sure that your sincerity is known to the customer. Because that's when they feel like you're loyal to them as opposed to just making your number.
Now, what's interesting about all of your answers kind of ties into the term okyaku-san wa kami-sama desu, right? The criticality of the customer, and yet the demands of customers, right? At different stages, let's say in a life cycle of a product, with different types of customers. H talked about issues related to cost of quality being high or low, but the arbiter of success lies with the customer's desires, the customer's demands, the customer's expectations, and that can vary by geography as well, right? So, in closing, first of all, if we could give a round of applause to our panel for terrific answers. I think at this point, apologies that we're running a little bit late, but we did want to leave some time for questions and answers. So if we have a microphone that we can pass around to anyone who has a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and you can address questions to any of our panelists or to Michael or me.
I tend to agree with that, customer is commitment. But I think with the advent of technology, that is changing very fast. And with the new millennia, they don't even see their suppliers. They just receive the packet from Kuroneko or Sagawa Kyubin, and they're happy. So I think that mode is changing very swiftly, and it's going to change probably in the next 20 years. This customer is Kami-sama is going to change very fast and rapidly. Amazon is a customer, a supplier there, and Amazon does not even see their customers most of the time. Rakuten is a supplier. Rakuten does not even see their customers. Sometimes they don't even know who their customers are. Because there could be a second layer, third layer who is receiving the packet. Because Oji-san does not know how to do it on the internet. So he will ask his mago or himago and say, please order this for me. So I think it is changing very rapidly. So we need to come up with better technology that will change all the system.
Anyone have a point of view or a comment on that statement?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to more of a retail or consumer market, and my experience of selling in Japan has been on the high-tech B2B kind of business. I think what you're referring to is more B2C kind of a scenario. In that particular case, it's the same everywhere. Amazon doesn't see their customer directly. Neither does Rakuten or Baidu or any one of these guys. So from consumer standpoint, that may be changing, but I think we are discussing more on the B2B side of things, where I believe still the situation is still the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that one, but I think it's more so institutionally used when a human-to-human interaction in any marketing, that's when you will face that customer is Kami-sama. Other than that, I don't see customer is Kami-sama. Those Shoten guys are dying very quickly. And they used to be thriving on business. I used to shop in Shotengai. I only like Shotengai because you'll see that Oji-san smile when he handed over the product. And that was more fulfilling than just getting a package from Amazon. So I still agree that yes, when you have a human-to-human interaction, yes. But that is also, I think, changing slowly but surely. In America, it has started changing, but I think elsewhere it will take over.
Yep. Got a question over here? If we could bring the microphone. Thank you.
Tom, I was just kind of curious, what kind of sales incentive structure did you end up with? So kind of hybrid, I've been through this exercise a bunch of times, I'm curious what you ended up with.
Yeah, so.
And be as specific as you like.
So it's a good question. So the learning process for me was to understand the team component and why that team component existed previously. And it goes back to kind of this Japanese culture of community and caring for the community. So the sales team was a community, and whether you were a good salesperson or not, it was their responsibility to protect people in the community. And they didn't care if you worked every day or you worked one day a week. You still had a family, you still had a mortgage, you still had parents you were taking care of. So for me, understanding that community aspect was important. And after I went through my learning process, what we ended up settling on, I would call it a negotiated compromise, that over a 3-year window, that we would go from 100% team and 0 individual to a 10% team and 90% individual. And at the same time, we changed our recruiting mindset, and that we started recruiting people that had that mindset, and not recruiting people that believed in their heart that the community team-based award was the right way to do it. And on the 3rd and 4th year, I would sit with those new hires and those new graduates, and the reason that they were attracted to us was that they recognized the benefit to them as an individual, which again is a little contrary to traditional Japanese culture, But at the end of the day, from a performance standpoint, that's what I needed, to weed out those that were not carrying their fair share. So it was I go back to my original thing about patience. My initial reaction was, I'm the boss and I'm going to do it tomorrow, understanding that that would not have worked. So a 3-year bleed-in was the way that I accomplished it.
Sorry, I'm taking advantage of the stuff. So it kind of relates to that is that Japan is quickly becoming less of a lifetime employment where, you know, there's a lot more restructuring and people are losing jobs. And how has that affected the way the whole Japanese economy? People in the past were willing to sacrifice and even die for the company so that the company will succeed. And people are less likely to do that today. How is that affecting how Japan lost the edge from the 80s versus today?
Anyone want to comment on that?
I'll give a short answer, and it kind of goes back to Nitin's comment. I think in a relatively short history ago, however you want to define that, the world was not as globally competitive as it is today. And you were able to go ahead and produce what you wanted and be sufficient in that space. The reality today is there are global competitors in almost every category. So you're either selling quality, service, price, relationship, whatever it is, but you are competing. And I think the Japanese, the portion of the Japanese society that is very, very inward focused, they need to understand that the world is moving on. And it's not, and that's not a negative. And I was giving Nitin the example before, so I'll take another minute. I had a conversation with, I was sitting having dinner with a customer and drinking and talking about everything. And somehow the conversation got on population and kind of where is Japan going population-wise. And he said, Dooley, you don't understand that there are too many of us. And I'm like, too many of us. And he goes, we went crazy after the war having babies for obvious reasons. And he goes, we got up to 132 million of us and we couldn't feed ourselves. Do you know how absurd that is for the Japanese to think we can't feed ourselves? And I'm like, everybody around the world trades in food. Why don't you trade in food? And that becomes a non-issue. But his perspective was that there are too many Japanese. So we're going through this generational process and we will get back to the right population and then we'll be okay. We've been here for thousands of years and we've had ups and downs and we've got a down period coming up. And I'm like, yeah, but come on, you're a father of 3 young adults. Think about the pressure you're putting on those kids for the rest of their life with a decreasing isolationist policy. And he said, come on, we've had ups and downs. We'll be okay. Don't you worry about it. So I think that would be, my answer is that there are either going to be progressive, globally minded people, or there are going to be traditional based that believe kind of the way it's always been is the way that it always should be. And there'll be economic ups and downs that go with it.
So Tom, what I'm noticing is that every time you had good conversations, there was drinks involved.
That was one of the things I learned very early.
Perhaps my view is a little bit different from yours, but as most of you may know, that the Japanese government clearly stated that we will be in short of the workforce to maintain the current level of economy, and that because government is now encouraging all the women who are not working right now to kind of get involved, and also try to create a diversified workplace for future. Their population will decrease, and that cannot be changed in 20 years, 30 years, that kind of time frame. So if Japan will stick to the current system, the economy side is going to just shrink. But I don't think that they're going to just wait and see for it. So two things can happen for Japanese economy. One is the diversified workforce, and the other one is the rapid implementation of AI technology that can supplement the lack of the workforces. And being that said, that may also affect Japanese kind of new product development activities as well, or launching, scaling up effort as well, because the implementation of AI will accelerate, and that's going to change the mentality of young people to adapt to those technologies. So I think that that's going to be a near future impact. Would you agree?
So I agree with you. I think that is definitely a change. And also another thing that is happening because of that, there are so many of my friends and their children, either sons or daughters, they have just graduated or they are graduating, and none of them want to work for any one of the established Japanese companies. Because they have seen their parents go through, they have seen their fathers leave for work at 7:30 in the morning, come late at night at 10, 11 o'clock, tired, no family life, etc., etc. And at the end of it, what did they get? They were let go. So a lot of the young Japanese people do not want to work for those companies, and that's why diversification is going to be the only way. I don't think even AI is going to be sufficient. It will be augmented, but it won't be sufficient to do all the things that need to be done.
So building off of that comment, there is, clearly a startup culture that's still happening in Japan, and Ken raised his hand. So that's your segue. We could give the microphone to Yasunagi-san.
Okay, I'm making a lot of investment to the Japanese startups, and things are really growing. And I see more entrepreneurs coming, and being very positive at this point. But in thinking globally, home appliance, quality control, that started to become the Chinese play or the Korean play, and also even the automobile industry that is changing to the EV. And that is now, we might lose our value propositions. So, and the software, everything is starting to become software, and that is kind of dominated by US players. And also the data is dominated by Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and so on. So what kind of value proposition for Japan do you see in the next 10 years or so? Where should we play in the corporate global world? Any recommendations?
Scott, you say. Anyone want to take a crack at that?
If I can take a shot at it, I think one of the things that Japan can do very well is Japan has dealt with population density very well. And China and India are the largest markets in the world. So if there are things that Japan or Japanese startups can look at, how population density and how some of the delivery of goods or even cleanliness for that matter, these kinds of things can be delivered to densely populated areas, they would have a lot more business in China and Japan. I think, frankly speaking, in my opinion at least, I think Japanese startups need to stop looking at the same things that US startups are looking at. Because I believe that Japan still has that name, it has the quality to stand behind, and they can do a lot better than American startups. Frankly speaking, a lot of American startups are in for a quick buck. Get into business, get some customers, turn it around, sell it to Google, make $10 million, and that's it, you're done. As opposed to that, Japanese companies are always there for the long haul. So what that long haul is, how they can leverage some of their own social structural conditions. I think that's what they need to look at.
I was going to add to that, Ken, thinking about the concentration of an aging population, that there are so many different countries right now that are going to be grappling with the issue of how do we care for our elderly, particularly as children are not as willing to take in their parents anymore in traditional structures, being able to take advantage of some of these newer technologies, whether it's robotics or other automation-based capabilities.